I was halfway through my morning coffee when the buzzing started. At first, I thought it was just an angry wasp, but then I saw it. Out of the corner of my eye, a sleek black drone hovering above my backyard, like a mechanical vulture. It dipped lower, its tiny camera zooming in on me while I stood in my bathrobe, holding a half-eaten piece of toast. My blood went cold, not from fear, but because I knew exactly who was behind it. HOA Karen. For years, she'd made it her personal mission to make my life miserable. My farm sat on the outskirts of the HOA's tightly controlled neighborhood, a piece of land she couldn't control. She tried everything: fines, complaints, even calling the city to report my geese as illegal poultry. But spying? That was a new low, even for her. The drone moved a little closer, its camera zooming in like it was taking an inventory of my property. I'd had enough. I grabbed the nearest object, an old slipper, and threw it at the drone. It dodged with ease, darting to the side like some smug little robot, taunting me. My geese, who had been preening themselves by the pond, noticed the intrusion. Sergeant Honkers, my biggest and meanest gander, hissed loudly. The rest of the flock followed suit, staring at the drone with angry glares. The drone hovered ominously above them, as if deciding whether they were its next target. I knew I had to act quickly. Karen wasn't just nosy, she was a threat. She had already tried to shut down my farm once, claiming I violated neighborhood aesthetic codes. If she was spying on me now, it meant she was looking for something to use against me. But she had underestimated me. She thought she was the only one who could play dirty. I stormed across the yard, still in my bathrobe, and marched straight to Karen's pristine house. Her lawn looked like it had been groomed with tweezers. The American flag in her yard flapped in the wind, as if even it disapproved of my existence. I knocked on the door, and it swung open to reveal Karen in her usual power stance. Arms crossed, mouth twisted into a smirk. "Oh," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "What a surprise. To what do I owe the pleasure?" I pointed back toward my house. "Cut the act, Karen. Call off your drone." She blinked, pretending to be innocent. "Drone? I don't know what you're talking about." Before I could respond, her husband, Greg, shuffled into view behind her. Greg was the type of guy who had given up on arguing years ago, looking defeated. He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Karen, just admit it. You've been flying that stupid thing over his farm all week." Karen's face twitched. "Greg, shut up." "No," I said, stepping forward. "Let him talk." Greg threw his hands up. "She bought that thing last month, said it was for neighborhood security. But let's be real, she's been using it to snoop on everyone. It's got a fancy camera, night vision, the whole deal. She even keeps a notebook of what she finds." I shot Karen a look, barely holding back my frustration. "So what exactly were you looking for, huh? A reason to report me? Trying to get my geese labeled as dangerous creatures again?" Karen's smirk returned. "Your geese are a nuisance. And let's not pretend you're some innocent farmer living off the land. Your property is an eyesore. It's unregulated. It drags down property values." There it was. The real reason. It wasn't about my geese, or my crops, or any supposed violations. It was all about control. Karen couldn't stand the fact that my farm existed outside of her tight grip. I let out a laugh, shaking my head. "You're unbelievable, you know that." She crossed her arms. "Oh please, what are you going to do about it? Report me? To who? The HOI? I am the HOI." That was the moment it hit me. This wasn't going to be solved with words. Karen thought she was untouchable. She thought she could do whatever she wanted. But she had just picked the wrong person to mess with. I turned around and walked away, my mind already racing. If Karen wanted to spy on me, fine. Let her. But she was about to find out the hard way that I wasn't just some stubborn farmer with a goose problem. I was about to become her worst nightmare. Back at the farm, I stood by the pond, watching Sergeant Honkers and the rest of his flock. They were still on edge from the drone's invasion, pacing around the water, their beady eyes scanning the sky. That's when the idea hit me. Geese were territorial. They were aggressive. And most importantly, they were smart. If Karen wanted to use her drone against me, I was going to fight fire with fire. I was going to train my geese to take it down. The next morning, I started experimenting. I grabbed an old RC helicopter I had lying around. I tied a few treats to it and flew it over the yard, observing how the geese reacted. Sergeant Honkers was the first to act, leaping into the air with a ferocity I hadn't seen before. He missed and splashed into the pond with all the grace of a cannonball. I adjusted my plan. I needed them to attack with more precision. Over the next few days, I fine-tuned the process. I used laser pointers to focus their attention, rewarding them with their favorite snacks whenever they made contact. It didn't take long before they got the hang of it. Then, the moment of truth came. I was sipping lemonade one afternoon when I heard the all-too-familiar buzzing. I set my drink down, whistled sharply, and pointed to the sky. The geese sprang into action. Sergeant Honkers led the charge, honking loudly like a general rallying his troops. The flock followed, flapping their wings aggressively. The drone tried to dodge, but the geese were faster than Karen had expected. Honkers leaped, his beak making solid contact with one of the drone's propellers. It wobbled midair, struggling to stabilize. Another goose swooped in from the side, pecking at the camera lens. The drone spun out of control, its high-tech defenses no match for the chaos my flock unleashed. With one final, triumphant honk, Sergeant Honkers delivered the finishing blow. The drone plummeted into the pond, sinking with a soft splash. I stood there for a moment, savoring the win. Then, from the other side of the fence, I heard a furious shriek. "You'll pay for this." I turned slowly, locking eyes with Karen, her face twisted in anger. She stood on her porch, fists clenched, eyes burning with rage. I couldn't help but smirk. "Guess you'll have to get a new toy." Her face turned crimson. "You think this is over?" I shrugged. "No, I think it's just getting started." With that, she stormed back inside, slamming the door behind her. I knew this wasn't the end. Karen never let things slide. If anything, this would only make her more determined. But that was fine. I was ready for whatever she had planned next. This wasn't just about my farm anymore. It was war, and I had an army of geese on my side. The morning after the drone takedown, my geese strutted around the farm like they had just returned from battle. And in a way, they had. Sergeant Honkers stood at the front of the flock, puffing his chest out like a victorious general, scanning the skies for any sign of a mechanical invader. I tossed him a handful of cracked corn as a reward, and he gobbled it up like he had earned it. But as much as I wanted to enjoy the victory, I knew Karen wasn't the type to let this go. She was out there, planning her next move. The war wasn't over. I spent the next couple of days keeping an eye on the skies, half expecting another drone to show up. Karen wouldn't just back down. She'd escalate. That was her style. But instead of immediate retaliation, everything went disturbingly quiet. Too quiet. No nasty notes on my fence. No bogus HOA fines. No passive-aggressive emails about the perils of rogue poultry in suburban neighborhoods. It didn't sit right with me. Karen never backed off. Then, just as I was starting to think she might have finally given up, the escalation hit. I was fixing a section of my fence when a sheriff's deputy pulled into my driveway. He got out of his patrol car, adjusted his belt, and walked toward me with the weary look of someone who didn't want to be there. "You the owner of this property?" he asked, flipping open a notepad. I wiped the sweat from my forehead and nodded. "Yeah, what's this about?" He sighed. "We got a complaint. Your geese are being classified as dangerous animals." I let out a short laugh. "You've got to be kidding me." He shook his head. "I wish I was, but the report claims your geese attacked and destroyed private property. A drone, specifically." I crossed my arms. "And I'm guessing the person who filed this complaint is a woman named Karen?" The deputy's face didn't change, but I caught the brief twitch at the corner of his mouth. I can't say who filed it, but I wasn't exactly surprised when I saw the name. I let out a frustrated breath. "Look, officer, I don't know what she told you, but that drone was spying on my property. I have the right to protect my land, and my geese did just that. They're not dangerous animals. They're just territorial." The deputy nodded slowly. "Yeah, I figured as much. But here's the thing. She's trying to get an official investigation started. If she gets her way, the county could send someone out here to evaluate whether or not your farm animals pose a public safety risk." My hands clenched into fists. "You've got to be kidding me. This is ridiculous." "I agree. But you know how these HOA people are. They make enough noise, and sometimes people start listening." He ripped a piece of paper from his notepad and handed it to me. "For now, just take this as a warning. No fine. No citation. Just a heads up that she's trying to play dirty." I took the paper and nodded. "Thanks for the heads up." As the deputy walked back to his car, I turned to look at my geese. Sergeant Honkers was staring back at me, tilting his head slightly as if he was waiting for orders. That's when I knew it was time to step things up. If Karen wanted to make this a fight, I had to be ready. I wasn't just going to defend my geese. I was going to make sure they were an unstoppable force. The next phase of training began that very afternoon. I set up a series of obstacles in the yard to test their reflexes and coordination. I hung fake drones from tree branches, had them chase remote-controlled cars, and even played recordings of drone sounds to see how quickly they'd react. The results were impressive. Geese weren't just aggressive. They were tactical. They picked up on patterns, recognized shapes, and worked together as a team. I focused especially on Sergeant Honkers, who had proven to be the most fearless of the flock. I started using a bright red laser pointer to guide his attacks, training him to recognize it as a signal. Within a few days, he was responding instantly, honking and charging whenever he saw the red dot appear. It was like having my own personal air defense system. Then, just as I was beginning to feel confident in our defenses, Karen made her next move. I was in my barn when I heard the unmistakable hum of a drone. But this time, it wasn't just one. There were three, circling above my property like a fleet of robotic vultures. I stepped outside, shielding my eyes from the sun, and watched as they moved in synchronized patterns, scanning every inch of my land. This wasn't just Karen being nosy. This was a full-on surveillance operation. I grabbed my whistle and blew a sharp command. The geese reacted immediately, their heads snapping up, wings twitching with excitement. I aimed the red laser at the closest drone. Go! Sergeant Honkers took the lead. He shot into the air, wings flapping hard, followed by two other geese. The drones swerved and dodged, clearly equipped with better agility than the last one. But my geese were faster, more aggressive, and far more determined. One by one, they made their moves. A peck to a rotor, a hard hit to the camera, a final, decisive blow to the underside. Within minutes, all three drones came crashing down, their broken pieces scattered across my land. I stood there, catching my breath, watching as Sergeant Honkers landed gracefully by my side. He looked up at me, chest puffed out, clearly waiting for praise. Good job, soldier, I muttered, tossing him a handful of treats. Then, from across the fence, I heard it. A furious scream. I turned to see Karen standing in her yard, her fists clenched, her face as red as a tomato. You think this is funny? She yelled. You think you can just destroy my property and get away with it? I smiled. I don't know what you're talking about. Looks like your drones just have terrible luck around here. Her nostrils flared. You're going to regret this. I'm done playing games. I crossed my arms. Oh, Karen, I don't think you ever realized something important. She narrowed her eyes. And what's that? I grinned. You started this war, but I'm the one who's going to end it. She stormed off, slamming her front door so hard that her American flag almost fell off the pole. I turned back to my geese, watching them preen themselves, clearly proud of their victory. This wasn't over. If anything, it was about to get crazier. The silence that followed was the worst part. After Karen's three-drone disaster, I expected a swift response. Some HOA nonsense. Maybe a lawsuit. At the very least, another dramatic screaming session in her front yard. But for 3 days, nothing happened. No angry letters. No visits from the cops. No passive-aggressive emails disguised as community concerns. That could only mean one thing. Karen was planning something big. I wasn't about to sit back and let her make the first move. I doubled down on training. My geese were already pros at taking out basic drones. But I had a feeling Karen wasn't going to send cheap ones next time. She had money, and she had connections. If she wanted to win, she'd pull out all the stops. So, I did the same. I built wooden platforms at various heights, forcing the geese to adjust their jumping angles. I tossed plastic frisbees into the air, making them chase moving targets. I even used an old leaf blower to mimic wind resistance. Sergeant Honkers picked it up the quickest. He was smarter than most dogs I'd known and tougher than any security system money could buy. Every time he brought down a moving target, he let out a victory honk that sent the rest of the flock into a frenzy. Then the real challenge came. I was replacing a section of fencing when I heard it. A deep, mechanical hum, unlike before. It wasn't the sharp whine of a cheap commercial drone. This sound was heavier, more powerful. When I looked up, I saw it hovering just beyond my property line. Karen had upgraded. It was bigger than the others, almost 3 times the size. Carbon fiber frame, reinforced propellers, a camera the size of a grapefruit. This wasn't a toy. It was military grade. She was done playing around. The drone dropped lower, just enough to be menacing but not technically trespassing. It was a warning shot, a way to show she thought she had the upper hand now. I wasn't about to let her believe that. I whistled sharply. My geese reacted right away, their heads snapping up, eyes zeroing in on the target. Sergeant Honkers let out a deep, guttural honk, a sound I had come to recognize as his battle cry. He took off first, wings pumping hard, with the rest of the flock right behind him. The drone moved fast. It wasn't like the others. It seemed to predict their movements, dodging midair like it had some kind of artificial intelligence. But my geese had something AI never could: rage. Sergeant Honkers dove first, aiming for the camera. The drone jerked sideways, narrowly avoiding him. Another goose launched from below, clipping one of the propellers, but it stayed in the air. It was fast, but the geese were unrelenting. They swarmed, attacking from all sides, their wings creating a chaotic whirlwind of feathers and fury. Then, Karen made her mistake. The drone, designed to evade, suddenly changed tactics. Instead of retreating, it charged forward, aggressively pushing into my airspace. It was illegal, but more than that, it was personal. Karen had lost control. She didn't just want to spy on me anymore. She wanted revenge. That was all I needed. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my secret weapon. A modified decoy drone, one I had rigged with a special surprise. A tiny, detachable packet of goose treats. I powered it up, and the decoy lifted off, glowing bright red. My geese, trained to respond to the color, immediately refocused. The moment the red drone appeared, Sergeant Honkers and his crew changed targets. They swerved midair, their attention fixed on my decoy. The real drone, still trying to shake them off, wasn't ready for what happened next. I flipped a switch. The decoy drone released its payload. An explosion of goose treats rained down like confetti. Sergeant Honkers saw his opportunity. He tucked in his wings and dove like a missile, beak first. The other geese followed, diving in perfect formation. The impact was incredible. The military-grade drone wobbled violently as the first hit landed, its stabilizers struggling to regain control. The second goose hit the camera, sending static across the feed. The third and fourth geese pecked at the propellers, and then, finally, Sergeant Honkers made the final move, grabbing the main frame and shaking it with all the strength his furious little body could muster. The drone spiraled out of control. It veered sideways, jerking and twisting in a desperate attempt to recover. For a moment, it looked like it might regain stability. But then, with one last defeated whine, it completely lost power. It crashed, right onto Karen's roof. For a few seconds, there was complete silence. Even my geese stopped honking, almost as if they were admiring their handiwork. Then, from the other side of the fence, I heard the most ear-splitting shriek of rage I'd ever heard. Karen stormed out of her house, her face twisted in disbelief and fury. She pointed at me, her hands shaking. This is your fault. I raised an eyebrow. Your drone was trespassing. She made an incoherent noise somewhere between a growl and a scream. Do you have any idea how much that cost? I shrugged. Should have read the HOA bylaws. No unauthorized aerial surveillance. Her jaw clenched so hard I thought her teeth would shatter. Then, like a woman possessed, she stormed back into her house. I half expected another police visit, but it never came. Instead, the real consequence arrived 2 days later. An emergency HOA meeting was called. The whole neighborhood showed up, many armed with complaints of their own. As it turned out, I wasn't the only one Karen had been spying on. Dozens of residents had footage of her drone flying past their windows, recording their backyards, even hovering over private pools. It wasn't just me she'd been targeting. It was everyone. The HOA board didn't hesitate. By unanimous vote, Karen was removed as president. Effective immediately, she lost her title, her power, and most importantly, her ability to control anyone. I stood outside, watching as she packed up her drone gear, cramming it into the back of her car with an expression of pure defeat. As she slammed the trunk shut, she turned to glare at me one last time. This isn't over, she snapped. I smiled. Oh, I think it is. She got in her car and drove off, her tires screeching on the pavement. I turned back to my geese, who stood proudly in formation, waiting for their next orders. Sergeant Honkers looked up at me, as if asking what the next mission was. I chuckled. At ease, soldier. We won. The geese honked in unison and waddled back toward the pond, victorious. Peace had finally been restored, at least until the next fool decided to mess with my farm.